Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. If you closed your eyes and woke up in America exactly 100 years ago, what would you expect to see? Would life be glamorous like the movies, or gritty and difficult like the history books often suggest? Today, let us travel together to the year 1921, not to the sparkling jazz clubs or the mansions of the wealthy, but to a very different place. A crowded city tenement where millions of ordinary families lived their daily lives. It may not be glamorous, but it reveals the heart of how most people truly experienced the 1920s. Imagine waking up before sunrise in a narrow apartment on the Lower East Side of New York City. The room you share with your younger brother is so small that your iron bed frame nearly touches the opposite wall. When you pull back the blanket, a wave of cold air hits your skin because the thin walls and drafty windows hardly keep the winter chill out. Instead of the gentle hum of a heater, the sound that wakes you is the rattle of water pipes and the muffled coughs of neighbors on the other side of the wall. In this building, privacy barely exists. Every sound, a baby crying, a chair scraping the floor, footsteps hurrying to work, seeps through. Like the building itself is alive with noise. There is no soft carpet beneath your feet, just creaking wooden boards worn smooth by countless families before yours. You shuffle toward a wash basin set on a wooden chair. A small pitcher of water waits there, cold to the touch. That is your sink. Running water is available in the building, but not always in your own unit. Bathing is something you do once a week at the public bathhouse, if you can afford it. Breakfast is simple and fast. Maybe a bowl of oatmeal with a spoonful of sugar if you are lucky, or stale bread dipped in weak coffee. Meat is rare for a weekday meal. Every penny counts. Your family spends more than half of its income on rent and basic food, leaving little for clothing, emergencies, or leisure. As you eat, you listen to your parents talk quietly about the bills. Rent is due in 2 days, and the landlord is not known for patience. If money is not ready on time, eviction is always a possibility. There is no tenant protection law yet. In fact, families often pay rent weekly in cash, directly to the landlord or his collector, who climbs the stairs from door to door. That pressure explains why almost every able-bodied member of the family works. Your father takes night shifts, unloading ships at the docks. You and your brother will soon walk to the garment factory, while your older sister works in a department store, standing on her feet all day for barely more than a few dollars a week. Even your mother contributes by taking in sewing and laundry. Childhood for most kids here ends quickly. When you arrive at the factory, the day stretches long ahead of you. 60 hours a week is considered normal, sometimes more if orders are high. The air inside is heavy with fabric dust and machine oil. Dozens of sewing machines clatter in unison, operated by workers from all over the world: Italian, Jewish, Polish, Irish, Greek. Each group brings its own language, but everyone shares the same tired posture, hunched over collars, sleeves, or linings. Your job might pay $12 a week, which sounds like a lot until you remember rent alone can take $30 a month. That means every dime matters. A missed shift can mean disaster. No one wants to risk being replaced because there are always new immigrants ready to take the spot. The lunch break is brief. A simple sandwich of bread and perhaps a slice of bologna is eaten in the stairwell or against a wall. No one lingers. Time is money, and the factory whistle waits for no one. And safety, that is another story. Not long ago, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire shocked the nation, killing 146 workers because exits were locked. Some reforms were introduced afterward, but conditions in many buildings remain far from safe. In the back of your mind, you know it could happen here too. By the time you return home, your body aches from standing or bending all day. The street outside is alive with noise. Children playing stickball, newsboys shouting headlines, horses clattering alongside electric streetcars. Prohibition has just begun, but if you listen closely, you might hear jazz music leaking from a hidden basement club nearby a speakeasy where neighbors sneak for an evening drink. Your family dinner is a pot of cabbage soup, thick but plain, with yesterday's bread to soak it up. As everyone eats, talk turns to survival. Which cousin has found a job? Which neighbor was evicted? Whether the landlord will raise rent again. There is a sense of solidarity in these conversations. Even though life is tough, people look out for one another. When we picture the 1920s, it is easy to imagine glamorous flapper dresses, shiny Model T cars, and roaring jazz clubs. Those things did exist, but they belonged to a small slice of the population. For millions of working-class families, life looked much more like this tenement apartment, crowded, noisy, exhausting, and uncertain. Yet within that struggle, there is something remarkable. Immigrant families carried traditions, languages, and skills across oceans, and despite hardship, they managed to carve out communities. They brought flavors to American kitchens, music to city streets, and labor that built industries. Without them, the famous Roaring Twenties might never have roared at all. So as you close your eyes and picture that cramped bedroom, the coal stove, the wash basin, and the sound of factory whistles in the distance, remember that this was the daily reality for countless Americans just a century ago. Their lives were full of challenges, but also resilience. In our next chapter, we will leave the crowded city behind and head out to the countryside, where farm families faced a different set of struggles and opportunities. The contrast will surprise you, because while one world was built on endless noise and factories, the other was bound by seasons, soil, and the hope of new machines like the Model T Ford. Stay with me, because the story of America in the 1920s is a story of extremes, and the only way to understand the decade is to see both sides. If city life in the 1920s meant cramped apartments and endless factory whistles, farm life offered the opposite: wide horizons, fresh air, and the constant rhythm of the land. But do not mistake that for ease or comfort. In many ways, life on the farm was just as hard, only shaped by different challenges. Picture this. Dawn breaks over Iowa in 1923. The rooster crows, the first light spills across frost-covered fields, and your day begins long before most city workers are even awake. Your home is a 2-story wooden farmhouse, built by your grandparents. It creaks when the wind pushes against its frame. Upstairs bedrooms have no heat. In winter, your breath forms clouds in the frigid air. The outhouse stands 50 yards behind the barn, a reminder that indoor plumbing is still a luxury many rural families won't see for years. You splash your face from a ceramic basin filled with water pumped from the well the night before. The water is so cold it stings your cheeks, but it wakes you instantly. The kitchen stove is already lit, and your mother works quietly in its glow. Breakfast here is not light. It has to fuel hours of heavy labor. Biscuits rise in the oven, salt pork sizzles in a skillet, and eggs from your own chickens are cracked into the pan. The smell of strong, boiling coffee fills the room. After breakfast, work begins without delay. First, the cows need to be milked. You carry a metal pail into the barn, the ground still frozen beneath your boots. The sound of the milk hitting the bucket echoes in the stillness of the morning. Then it is time to feed the pigs, scatter grain for the chickens, and check the fences after last night's wind. Every member of the family has a role, from the youngest to the oldest. There are no days off. Even on holidays, The animals still need care, and the land still demands attention. Life on the farm is deeply tied to nature's moods. Rain, drought, or frost can mean the difference between a profitable harvest and a devastating loss. Unlike city workers who earn a paycheck each week, farmers gamble their entire year on crops and livestock. One bad season can ripple for years, forcing families into debt or even foreclosure. That uncertainty adds a constant layer of worry, even when the skies are clear. And yet, amid this hard routine, something new is arriving that changes farm life forever: the automobile. Imagine the day your father drives home a brand new Model T Ford. The family gathers around, marveling at the machine as though it were a visitor from the future. Until now, the horse-drawn wagon was the main way to reach town, a journey that could take hours. With the Model T, that same trip becomes less than an hour. At first, learning to use the car is intimidating. Starting it requires turning a hand crank that can snap back dangerously if you do it wrong. The pedals are unlike anything on modern vehicles, and the gears must be coaxed into place. Early mistakes leave dents on the fender or a tire blown out on a dusty road. But once the car roars to life, it feels like freedom. Suddenly, distant neighbors are no longer isolated, and the county fair or the general store does not seem so far away. The automobile does not just change how farmers travel, it changes how they think. A trip to town is no longer a rare occasion. It can be a weekly routine. Families begin to attend church or school events more regularly. They can sell produce and buy supplies with greater ease. Even social life expands. A young couple might now drive into town for a movie at the local theater, something their parents never imagined when they were courting. But technology comes with costs. Cars need gasoline, tires, and repairs, all of which demand cash. Many farm families are cautious with money, weighing every purchase carefully. Buying a car might mean delaying the purchase of a new plow or taking out a small loan at the local bank. The decision ties the family even more tightly to the uncertain markets of both agriculture and industry. Beyond the car, other machines slowly find their way to the farm. Gasoline-powered tractors start replacing horses in some fields, though not everyone can afford one yet. For those who can, the tractor is revolutionary. It saves time, covers more ground, and opens the door to larger harvests. Still, tractors are expensive, and maintenance can be daunting. The adoption of technology is uneven, with wealthier farmers moving ahead, while poorer ones struggle to keep up. Despite the hard work, there are moments of peace that city families rarely experience. Evenings might be spent on the porch, watching the sunset across fields that seem endless. Neighbors sometimes gather for barn dances or church socials, bringing music, laughter, and stories to break the monotony of daily labor. Children invent games in haylofts or chase each other through rows of corn. These moments of joy are reminders that even in a demanding life, community and connection bring lightness. Yet, the farm is not immune to larger national changes. The same radio that entertains city families also begins to reach rural homes. Imagine stringing up a long antenna outside your house and adjusting the dial until voices crackle through. Suddenly, you can hear jazz from Chicago, news from Washington, or even the president's voice live. For the first time, a family in Iowa hears the same program as one in New York. The world feels smaller, even while the fields around you remain vast. But beneath these changes lies tension. Many farmers borrowed money to expand production during World War I, when demand for American crops was high. After the war, prices fell sharply. Wheat, corn, and cotton no longer brought in the profits they once did, leaving families struggling with debt. This rural depression actually began years before the famous stock market crash of 1929, but it quietly reshaped the countryside throughout the decade. So while the Roaring Twenties are remembered for flappers, jazz, and booming stock markets, rural families experienced a different reality. Their lives were not about excess, but about endurance. They balanced the promise of modern machines with the fear of financial strain. They watched the sky each morning, hoping for rain or sun at the right time, knowing that fate could change their year in a heartbeat. If the tenement families of New York carried resilience forged by noise and overcrowding, farm families carried resilience forged by soil, weather, and endless work. Both worlds required sacrifice, and both built the backbone of America's 1920s. As the sun sets on our imaginary day in Iowa, the family gathers around the kitchen table for supper. The meal is hearty potatoes, beans, cornbread, perhaps a slice of pie if there is fruit from the orchard. Laughter rises as children share stories from the day, and for a moment, the worries of debt and weather fade away. Outside, the Model T rests in the yard, a symbol of both hope and uncertainty. Inside, the family strength comes not from machines or money, but from each other, and that is the heart of rural America in the 1920s. A life of hard work, fragile finances, but also deep family ties, and a spirit of perseverance that carried communities through the decade. If New York tenements embodied struggle, and Iowa farms embodied endurance, small-town America in the 1920s represented something in between a middle path. Here, families were not as crowded as city dwellers, nor as isolated as farmers. They lived in modest houses on quiet streets, enjoyed a sense of community, and increasingly embraced the new technologies and entertainment that were reshaping American culture. Imagine waking up in Millerville, Pennsylvania, a town of just a few thousand people in 1925. The streets are lined with elm trees, the sidewalks are swept clean, and neighbors greet one another by name. Your home is a two-story house on Elm Street, with a little front porch where your mother sets potted flowers in the summer. Compared to the farmhouses or tenements we have seen, your family is fortunate. The house has electricity in most rooms, indoor plumbing, and even a telephone hanging in the hallway. Your bedroom is your own, a luxury many children of the time never had. The quilt on your bed is ordered from a Sears catalog. The curtains are patterned cotton, and beside your bed sits a Victrola record player. Pinned to the walls are clippings of movie stars: Clara Bow, Rudolph Valentino, Harold Lloyd, the faces everyone talks about. In the corner, a crystal radio set that you built from a kit gleams proudly. It may not look like much, but it connects you to voices hundreds of miles away. The smell of bacon and coffee drifts up from the kitchen, and the sound of the radio crackles faintly. You head downstairs, where your family gathers around a proper dining table. Your father, who manages the local hardware store, is already reading the morning newspaper. Your mother, unusual for women of her generation, helps with bookkeeping at the store. Your younger brother fiddles with the radio dial, trying to catch a broadcast from Pittsburgh. Don't touch that, your father warns without looking up. The president's speaking tonight. I want a clear signal. The radio is the pride of your household. A new Atwater Kent model with glowing tubes and a polished wooden cabinet. It costs nearly 2 weeks of your father's wages, but it is more than furniture. It is a window into a larger world. Just a few years ago, most small-town families got newsdays late through newspapers or word of mouth. Now they can hear national broadcasts in real time, from sports matches to political speeches. For the first time, you and your neighbors experience the same events at the same moment as millions of other Americans. Breakfast over, you walk with your brother to run errands before school. The streets are alive with small-town rhythms. Mr. Peterson unlocks the pharmacy. Mrs. Winters sweeps the sidewalk in front of her millinery shop. The postman carries a heavy sack of letters down Main Street. Everyone knows your name, and 3 people greet you before you reach the corner. Small-town life is intimate, comforting if you value community, stifling if you crave privacy. As you pass the Rialto Theater, you see the marquee advertising Harold Lloyd's new comedy, The Freshman. Posters outside show him dangling from a clock face in comic panic. Movies have become the heartbeat of small-town entertainment. Just a few years earlier, the town had only one small, drafty theater. Now it has 2, including the Rialto, with cushioned seats, electric fans, and a dazzling painted ceiling. Going to the movies is no longer a rare treat. It is a weekly ritual for families, couples, and teenagers alike. Movies also fuel a new kind of culture: celebrity worship. In the newsstand window, stacks of Photoplay magazine beckon with glossy photos of Chaplin, Swanson, and Fairbanks. You spend your allowance on an issue, joining millions of Americans who now follow the romances, scandals, and fashions of people they will never meet. For the first time, mass media creates shared cultural reference points. Everyone, from New York to rural Nebraska, laughs at the same jokes and swoons over the same stars. School takes up the middle of your day. But even here, the modern world is creeping in. Instead of a one-room schoolhouse, your town has a consolidated high school with specialized teachers, a small science lab, and even a gymnasium. Education is becoming standardized, preparing students not just for local life, but for participation in a national culture. At recess, you and your friends debate who is funnier, Harold Lloyd or Charlie Chaplin, proving how deeply movies have penetrated teenage conversations. After school, the real social hub awaits: Miller's Drugstore. You and your friends pile into booths at the soda fountain, ordering cherry phosphates and sundaes. A college student home for summer break works behind the counter, dropping a Louis Armstrong record onto the Victrola. Suddenly, the shop fills with the raw, joyful sounds of jazz. A music older generations dismiss as wild and dangerous, but which you and your peers embrace as thrilling and new. Teen culture is being born here. For the first time, young people have music, dances, and fashions distinct from their parents. You and your friend Helen practice the Charleston in the corner, arms swinging and knees kicking to the rhythm. Parents frown, but you laugh, knowing this freedom of movement and style defines your generation. The radio continues to tie the town together. Last week, your classmate Edward bragged that his family bought a new radiola with 6 tubes. He stayed up to hear the Jack Dempsey boxing match live from New York. When he recounted the blow-by-blow the next morning, kids listened with awe. A sporting event once limited to big city spectators now electrifies small-town living rooms. Athletes become celebrities, and America feels smaller, more connected. As evening approaches, you walk home with your father from the hardware store. The display windows show more than tools: electric toasters. Radios and automobile supplies now fill the shelves. Consumer culture is exploding. Advertising urges families to buy appliances they never imagined needing. Radios, vacuums, refrigerators items, once considered luxuries, are now marketed as necessities of modern life. Dinner follows a traditional rhythm, with the whole family gathered around the table. But afterward, instead of reading or sewing by lamplight, you join millions of other families across America in the living room, gathered around the radio. Tonight, President Coolidge delivers a national address. The room falls silent as his voice fills the air, crackling slightly but still astonishingly present. The president himself speaking directly into your home, something unimaginable just a decade earlier. After the speech, you and your brother beg to go to the Rialto for the evening show. Your father relents, and soon you are standing outside the theater, surrounded by a crowd of farmers, shopkeepers, and families, all eager for 2 hours of escape. Inside, the theater dazzles with velvet curtains, painted ceilings, and golden light. A live organist begins to play as the lights dim. First comes a newsreel showing world events: floods in Mississippi, a royal tour in Africa, fashions in Paris. For many in your town, this is their only visual glimpse of the wider world. Then a Felix the Cat cartoon bounces across the screen, bringing laughter from children and adults alike. Finally, the main feature begins, silent but powerful, with exaggerated expressions and stunts that make the audience gasp and cheer in unison. For 2 hours, you are part of something larger, a national community of moviegoers sharing the same story. When the film ends, you walk home under glowing street lamps, your head filled with images, your heart still beating to the rhythm of jazz. Upstairs in your room, you adjust the dial on your crystal radio, listening to faint music drifting in from distant cities. The world feels closer than ever, even from your small town. This is the paradox of small-town life in the 1920s, rooted in tradition, but increasingly connected to a modern, mass media culture, a world where neighbors still know your name, but movie stars and radio announcers feel just as familiar, a place balanced between local community and national identity. And in these towns, the seeds of modern American culture, celebrity obsession, consumerism, teenage independence, and shared mass entertainment take root and grow. If the crowded tenement revealed struggle, and the rural farm showed endurance, and the small town displayed balance, then the world of the wealthy elite in the 1920s embodied extravagance. These were the people who defined the phrase, the Roaring Twenties. For them, life was not about survival. It was about display, indulgence, and the belief that prosperity had no limits. Imagine driving north along Long Island's Gold Coast in 1926. The sun is setting over manicured lawns, and on both sides of the road rise immense estates with wrought iron gates and marble fountains. Behind those gates stand mansions designed like European palaces, columns, grand staircases, vast gardens, imported straight from Versailles. It is no accident that this setting later inspired The Great Gatsby, because here the American elite lived with a level of luxury that felt almost unreal compared to the rest of the nation. Inside one such mansion, the night has just begun. Servants move silently, lighting chandeliers that sparkle with crystal brilliance. Tables are set with imported silverware and porcelain. A jazz band warms up in the corner, their instruments gleaming under the electric lights. Guests begin to arrive in a procession of polished cars, Packards, Cadillacs, and Pierce Arrows, each more impressive than the last. Drivers in uniform open doors, and women step out in satin gowns trimmed with beads, while men in tuxedos adjust their cufflinks with practiced ease. The party atmosphere is immediate. Waiters circulate with trays of champagne. Despite prohibition, alcohol flows freely in elite circles. The law may ban it, but wealth has a way of bending rules. Behind discreet doors, private wine cellars remain stocked with European vintages, and shipments of liquor find their way into these estates through networks of smugglers and corrupt officials. For the wealthy, prohibition is little more than an inconvenience. Music fills the ballroom as couples begin to dance. The Charleston, the foxtrot, the black bottom, all the latest steps ripple across polished floors. A woman's beaded dress catches the light with each swing of her hips, and laughter rings out louder than the trumpets. For many guests, these parties are not just entertainment. They are opportunities to make deals, cement alliances, and show off wealth in a social competition that never ends. Who has the finest orchestra, the tallest ballroom ceiling, the most daring new automobile? In this world, appearances matter as much as fortunes. But it is not only parties that define elite life. By day, the wealthy pursue new amusements. Private clubs host tennis matches and golf tournaments, sports that become symbols of sophistication. Yachts line the coasts, ready for weekend cruises to Newport or Palm Beach. Horse racing and polo provide spectacle for those who can afford both the horses and the time. For elite families, leisure itself becomes a mark of class, the ability to spend hours on recreation while others toil in factories or fields. Their homes reflect the same philosophy. Interiors are furnished with imported rugs, grand pianos, and oil paintings. Kitchens have the latest appliances, while bathrooms gleam with marble. Servants, cooks, maids, chauffeurs, gardeners keep everything running smoothly, allowing owners to focus on enjoyment rather than labor. Children attend private academies and European tours where they learn French, piano, and the art of sophistication. For them, the world feels limitless. Yet, beneath the glamour, something deeper is happening: speculation. Many elite fortunes in the 1920s are not built just on inherited wealth, but on stock markets, real estate, and booming industries. The decade is a playground for investors. Buying stocks on margin, borrowing money to invest becomes common, and profits seem unstoppable. Newspapers print headlines about record highs, and everyone in the elite world seems certain that prosperity is permanent. This confidence fuels extravagance. Why worry about tomorrow when fortunes are multiplying today? This attitude creates a cultural gap wider than ever before. While working-class families count pennies for bread, the elites spend thousands on pearls, diamonds, and imported cars. Newspapers feed the contrast, with society pages covering every gala, wedding, and charity ball in breathless detail. Photographs of glamorous women in fur stoles and glittering gowns circulate nationwide, shaping the dreams of those who will never attend such events. The elite become both admired and resented, symbols of aspiration, but also targets of frustration. One striking symbol of elite life is the rise of Palm Beach and Miami as playgrounds for the rich. In the 1920s, Florida undergoes a real estate boom, with luxurious hotels and seaside mansions sprouting along the coast. Wealthy northerners flock south in winter, trading snow for sun. Lavish resorts host endless parties, beach picnics, and polo matches, while land speculation pushes prices higher and higher. For a moment, Florida feels like the future, until hurricanes and financial reality slow the frenzy. Another mark of elite influence is philanthropy. Wealthy families establish foundations, sponsor museums, and fund universities. Sometimes this generosity springs from genuine vision. Other times it is a way to polish reputations. Regardless, elite money shapes culture, from art galleries filled with European masters to theaters where symphonies play. Their tastes, good or bad, ripple outward into the nation's cultural fabric. But we should not be fooled into thinking elite life is entirely carefree. Behind the glamour, scandals simmer. Affairs, betrayals, and whispered rumors fuel gossip columns. Business empires rise and collapse, fortunes shift overnight, and legal troubles sometimes pierce the gilded surface. The pressure to maintain appearances is constant. A bad investment, a scandalous divorce, or a failed enterprise can exile a family from high society as quickly as wealth once admitted them. Still, for most of the decade, the illusion holds. America's wealthy elite seem untouchable, insulated from hardship and glowing in endless prosperity. When the rest of the country talks about the Roaring Twenties, they are often picturing this world, glittering parties, fast cars, daring fashions, and jazz echoing into the night. It is a world of confidence, sometimes arrogance, built on the belief that nothing could ever go wrong. Of course, we know with hindsight that this confidence is fragile. By the decade's end, the very speculation that fuels elite excess will help trigger the crash of 1929. But in the mid-1920s, no one at these parties imagines such a collapse. The champagne is cold, the music is loud, and the night feels endless. So as you picture the Gold Coast mansions, the chandeliers, the dance floors, and the endless laughter, remember this was only one version of America in the 1920s. It dazzled the nation, but it was far removed from the crowded tenement, the struggling farm, or the modest small town. The elite lived in another world entirely, one that seemed both inspiring and alien to ordinary families. And yet, the story of the 1920s cannot be told without them. For better or worse, their extravagance set the tone for a decade that still captivates our imagination today. While the wealthy elite danced beneath chandeliers and the middle class gathered around radios, another force was reshaping America in the 1920s, Prohibition. In theory, it was a grand social experiment, a constitutional amendment banning the production, sale, and transport of alcohol. Reformers believed it would solve poverty, end crime, and strengthen families. Instead, it created a thriving underground culture of secret bars, organized crime, and rebellion that defined the decade as much as jazz and flappers. Picture yourself walking down a quiet city street in Chicago in 1924. The shops are closed, the sidewalks nearly empty, but you notice a narrow door with no sign. A man in a fedora leans casually against the wall. When you whisper the right password, he nods and lets you in. Inside, the world transforms. Jazz bursts from a trumpet, women laugh with cocktails in hand, and the air smells of cigarette smoke and gin. You have just stepped into a speakeasy, one of thousands, hidden across America. These secret bars operated in basements, back rooms, and abandoned warehouses. Some were glamorous, with velvet curtains, chandeliers, and marble bars. Others were shabby, with mismatched chairs and peeling paint. But all shared the same spirit, defiance. Customers ranged from working-class laborers sneaking in for a cheap beer to society ladies sipping martinis in satin dresses. Even politicians and policemen, who were supposed to enforce the law, often became regulars themselves. Prohibition had begun in 1920, with the passage of the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act. Supporters, many from religious and rural communities, believed banning alcohol would reduce domestic violence, improve health, and create a more moral society. For a moment, the plans seemed to work. Alcohol consumption did drop in the early years, and reformers celebrated. But Americans had a stubborn streak. They did not want to give up their beer, whiskey, or wine. Instead of disappearing, alcohol simply went underground. The demand created opportunity, and organized crime seized it. Figures like Al Capone in Chicago or Lucky Luciano in New York built empires by smuggling liquor from Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean. They bribed police officers, judges, and politicians to look the other way. Trucks carrying crates of whiskey roared down country roads at night. Speedboats smuggled rum along the coasts. Hidden breweries operated in abandoned barns, and bathtub gin became a household phrase. Crime, ironically, flourished under a law meant to reduce it. Gang wars erupted in major cities as rival groups fought for control of lucrative territories. The most infamous incident was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, when Capone's men gunned down 7 rivals in broad daylight. Newspapers splashed the photos across front pages, shocking the nation and proving that Prohibition's unintended consequences were spiraling out of control. Yet, for many ordinary Americans, Prohibition was less about gangsters and more about adventure. Visiting a speakeasy felt like stepping into another world, risky, glamorous, and exciting. Jazz bands provided the soundtrack, their music wild and improvisational, perfectly matching the atmosphere of rebellion. Young women, the so-called flappers, embraced short skirts, bobbed hair, and cocktails, defying older generations' expectations. Men loosened their ties, played cards, and drank bootleg whiskey that burned going down but still lifted spirits. In cities, speakeasies multiplied rapidly. New York alone may have had as many as 30,000 hidden bars by the mid-1920s. In smaller towns, the local speakeasy might operate in the back of a grocery store or above a barber shop. Some required secret knocks. Others relied on police payoffs. Everyone seemed to know where to go, even if officially no one admitted it. This underground culture even reshaped fashion and entertainment. Cocktail dresses were designed for movement and dance. Bartenders became innovators, mixing strong bootleg liquor with fruit juices and syrups to mask its harsh taste, giving birth to many classic cocktails still popular today. Jazz musicians, often from African American communities, found steady work in speakeasies, helping spread the music nationwide. These clubs became spaces of cultural mixing, where people of different backgrounds gathered in ways society outside often discouraged. Meanwhile, the federal government struggled to enforce the law. The Prohibition Bureau was underfunded and undermanned, facing widespread corruption. Coastlines were too long to patrol, and cities too crowded to control. Agents raided breweries and bars, smashing barrels with axes, but for every location shut down, 2 more opened the next week. Enforcement became a game of cat and mouse, one that the authorities seemed destined to lose. For rural and conservative communities, this urban nightlife symbolized decline and immorality. Preachers thundered from pulpits about sin and corruption. Newspapers debated whether the nation's soul was being lost. But in the cities, the excitement was undeniable. For many young Americans, drinking in a speakeasy was not just about alcohol. It was about freedom, rebellion, and modern identity. By the mid-1920s, cracks in Prohibition's promise were clear. Arrests for drunkenness actually rose, crime families grew richer than ever, and public respect for the law collapsed. When lawmakers themselves were caught drinking at parties, ordinary citizens saw hypocrisy. Slowly, support for the ban eroded. Still, the cultural mark remained. The image of a smoky speakeasy, filled with jazz, laughter, and hidden bottles, became one of the defining symbols of the decade. It revealed a contradiction at the heart of the 1920s. America was a nation that preached morality by day, but danced in defiance by night. Looking back, Prohibition teaches a powerful lesson about unintended consequences. What was meant to uplift society instead fueled corruption, violence, and inequality. Yet, it also helped shape a new culture of nightlife, music, and fashion that still echoes today. As we leave the speakeasy, stepping back into the quiet city street, the laughter and trumpet notes fading behind us, we see America in transition, a country wrestling with its values, laws, and desires. Prohibition was supposed to end temptation, but instead it revealed just how deeply people crave freedom, even when it means breaking the rules. Step out of the speakeasy and walk just a few blocks deeper into the city, and you will find yourself in a different kind of world. The immigrant neighborhoods. In New York, it might be Little Italy, or the Jewish Lower East Side. In Chicago, the Polish District, or Greek Town. In San Francisco, Chinatown, these neighborhoods were crowded, noisy, and sometimes poor, but they were also rich in tradition, color, and resilience. They reveal another side of the 1920s, the lives of millions of newcomers who carried old world cultures into a new world landscape. Imagine standing on Mulberry Street in New York's Little Italy on a Saturday afternoon. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce drifts from tenement kitchens. Children chase one another between push carts, loaded with fresh bread, fruit, and fish. Old men sit on stoops, speaking rapid Italian, while women hang laundry between buildings on long lines that crisscross above the street like flags. The air is alive with music, a street accordionist plays, and a crowd gathers to sing along. Life here is hard. Many families live in small apartments, with several relatives under one roof. Jobs are tough to find, and when they are found, they often pay the lowest wages. Factories, construction sites, and sweatshops are filled with immigrant laborers who work long hours in dangerous conditions. Discrimination is common. Signs that read, "No Irish need apply," or "English only" appear in shop windows and job postings. Some landlords refuse to rent to certain ethnic groups. Even children face teasing in school for their accents or customs. Yet, despite these hardships, immigrant communities thrive in ways that surprise outsiders. They build networks of support, where neighbors help one another with money, food, or childcare. Churches, synagogues, and temples become anchors of daily life, offering both spiritual comfort and practical aid. Mutual aid societies emerge, small organizations that provide loans, health care, or burial assistance when the government offers little safety net. Culture is everywhere. Italians celebrate the Feast of San Gennaro with parades, food, and fireworks that light up the night. Jewish families prepare challah bread and matzo ball soup for Sabbath dinners. Polish communities host festivals with folk dances and colorful costumes. Each neighborhood brings a piece of the old country into the new, transforming American cities into mosaics of languages, smells, and traditions. Food especially becomes a bridge between worlds. In the 1920s, many dishes we now think of as quintessentially American pizza, bagels, hot dogs, pierogi, were still considered ethnic foods, eaten mainly in immigrant neighborhoods. Slowly, they spread outward, carried by curiosity and taste. A New Yorker who tasted spaghetti in Little Italy might bring the memory home, helping Italian food become mainstream. Over time, America's dining table widened, thanks to these communities. Music, too, travels. African-American jazz, born in New Orleans, finds new audiences in immigrant clubs and dance halls. Irish fiddles mix with American folk. Eastern European melodies influence early klezmer bands, whose clarinets and violins echo through crowded streets. The cross-pollination of cultures creates something uniquely American, a sound, a flavor, a style that belongs to no single group but is shared by all. Immigrant children grow up straddling two worlds. At home, they speak their parents' language, eat traditional foods, and observe customs passed down for generations. At school, they learn English, memorize American history, and pledge allegiance to the flag. Many feel torn between preserving heritage and fitting into the broader society. This tension shapes an entire generation, producing young people who are bilingual, adaptable, and ambitious. For parents, the sacrifices are immense. They often work exhausting hours so their children can attend school, hoping the next generation will find better opportunities. Stories abound of mothers sewing late into the night, or fathers taking extra shifts at the docks so their children might become teachers, doctors, or shop owners. Education becomes the golden ticket, the bridge from the immigrant struggle to middle-class stability. But resilience is not just economic, it is emotional. Imagine the strength it takes to leave a village in Italy, Poland, or China, cross an ocean, and start again in a land where the language is strange, the laws unfamiliar, and prejudice constant. Yet millions did just that. Driven by hope, they dreamed of owning homes, sending children to college, or simply finding safety and dignity. And while not every dream was realized, the persistence itself reshaped America. These communities also leave political marks. Immigrant voices begin to shape labor unions, fighting for fair wages and safer conditions. In some cities, ethnic groups become powerful voting blocs, supporting candidates who promise reforms. Newspapers in dozens of languages flourish, offering news from both the old country and the new. Through these efforts, immigrants not only adapt to America, they help transform it. Of course, tensions remain. Nativist movements rise in the 1920s, fueled by fear of foreign influence. The Ku Klux Klan experiences a revival, targeting Catholics, Jews, and immigrants alongside African Americans. Immigration laws tighten, with quotas that sharply reduce arrivals from Southern and Eastern Europe, while nearly shutting the door on Asia. These policies create anxiety, but they also strengthen the determination of those already here to prove their worth and claim their place in the nation. And slowly they succeed. By the decade's end, children of immigrants are entering universities, opening businesses, and even stepping into politics. The neighborhoods that once seemed foreign become iconic parts of American identity. The sounds of Italian opera, Jewish klezmer, and Chinese lantern festivals weave into the broader culture. The resilience of these communities does not just help them survive. It enriches the entire nation. So when we imagine the 1920s, we cannot only picture speakeasies, jazz clubs, or glittering mansions. We must also picture Mulberry Street, Maxwell Street, Chinatown alleys, and crowded tenements alive with music and tradition. Here is where America's future was quietly being built, in kitchens where mothers stirred pots of soup, in shops where fathers hammered shoes, in classrooms where children learned to dream in two languages at once. This is the heartbeat of immigrant America in the 1920s. Struggle, yes, but also resilience, creativity, and hope. And without these communities, the decade would not only look different, it would be different. They gave America new flavors, new sounds, and above all, new strength. Imagine standing on a quiet street in 1905. The clip-clop of horses, the creak of wagons, and the occasional puff of smoke from a rare automobile. Now fast forward 20 years. It is 1925, and that same street has transformed. The steady rumble of engines drowns out horses. Roads are wider, dustier, and lined with gas stations, repair shops, and diners. Children no longer chase after wagons. They stare in awe at gleaming cars. The automobile has arrived, and it is changing everything. The star of this revolution is the Ford Model T. Introduced in 1908, it becomes the defining machine of the 1920s, thanks to Henry Ford's assembly line, which makes it affordable for ordinary Americans. By the mid-1920s, a Model T costs under $300 within reach of middle-class families. For the first time, mobility is not just for the rich. It is for shopkeepers, farmers, and factory workers too. Picture a family in Ohio, 1923. After years of saving, they proudly drive home their first Model T. It is black, boxy, and rattles over bumps, but it feels like freedom. On Sundays, they pile into the car for drives through the countryside, exploring towns they have never visited before. Vacations, once rare luxuries, now become possible. The automobile expands horizons, literally and figuratively. Roads quickly adapt. New highways crisscross states, connecting cities and towns. Gasoline stations multiply, marked by bright red pumps and smiling attendants who wipe windshields and check oil. Motels and roadside diners spring up to serve travelers. Even entire industries, asphalt, rubber, steel, boom because of the car. The nation itself seems to be remade in service of the automobile, but the car does not just reshape the economy, it reshapes culture. For young people, the automobile is more than transportation. It is independence. Teenagers no longer depend entirely on parental supervision. With keys in hand, they can escape to the edge of town, park near a lake, or join friends at a dance miles away. Dating culture shifts dramatically. The car becomes a private space, part chariot of romance, part symbol of modern identity. For women, too, the car brings new freedoms. Imagine a young woman in a cloche hat, gripping the wheel of her family's Model T. Just a generation earlier, women were largely confined to home, their movements tied to walking distance or public trolleys. Now they can drive themselves to work, to social gatherings, even to rallies for women's rights. The automobile becomes part of a broader wave of female independence in the 1920s. Of course, driving is not always smooth. Early cars are notoriously temperamental. Starting requires skill. Turn the crank wrong, and you might injure your wrist. Tires burst frequently, radiators boil over, and engines stall without warning. Drivers carry toolkits, extra water, and plenty of patience. Roads outside cities are often unpaved, turning into rivers of mud after rain. Yet, the inconveniences do not deter anyone. The thrill of mobility outweighs the frustration. With cars everywhere, new social behaviors appear. Families spend evenings on Sunday drives, cruising without destination, simply for pleasure. Children lean out of windows, hair blowing in the wind. Couples race to the countryside for picnics. Towns host parades of decorated cars during holidays. The car becomes not just a machine, but a stage for American life. Meanwhile, industries race to capitalize on this obsession. Billboards rise along highways, advertising soda, cigarettes, and vacation spots. Roadside diners become iconic, offering hamburgers, pie, and strong coffee to travelers. Tourist cabins, the ancestors of motels, appear for families who want affordable places to rest during long trips. America develops a roadside culture that will only grow in decades to come. The automobile also fuels the growth of suburbs. No longer bound to live near factories or offices, families can move farther out, where land is cheaper and houses have more space. Commuting by car becomes practical. Suburban neighborhoods sprout outside cities, filled with tidy lawns and garages. For many middle-class families, this shift promises a healthier, quieter life, while still connected to urban opportunities. But the car brings challenges too. Traffic accidents rise sharply. Inexperienced drivers, poor roads, and lack of rules make for dangerous conditions. Newspapers report tragic crashes, sparking debates about safety. By the late 1920s, stop signs, traffic lights, and driver's licenses begin appearing to tame the chaos. Police patrols on motorcycles chase speeding cars, reminding everyone that freedom comes with responsibility. Environmental changes are subtle, but real. Streets once filled with horses now smell of gasoline and oil. The air in busy cities thickens with exhaust. Farmers complain that car dust ruins crops near highways, yet at the time, these problems seem minor compared to the marvel of mobility. The automobile even reshapes entertainment. Car races at fairgrounds draw huge crowds, with daring drivers testing the limits of speed. Movies celebrate the romance of the open road, with chase scenes thrilling audiences. Songs about driving and cars enter the popular repertoire. The car becomes both a practical tool and a cultural symbol, representing progress, independence, and modernity. Not everyone, of course, welcomes the change. Older generations lament the loss of quiet streets. Ministers warn that cars encourage immorality, giving young people too much privacy. Farmers complain that city folk now trample their fields during Sunday drives. Some critics fear that Americans are becoming obsessed, pouring too much money and identity into machines. Yet, resistance cannot stop the tide. By the end of the decade, America is firmly a car nation. Ford has produced more than 15 million Model Ts. General Motors rises with flashy models in different colors, offering choices beyond Ford's any color so long as it is black. Competition sparks style, comfort, and innovation. The automobile is no longer just a tool, it is a lifestyle. Imagine driving at dusk in 1928, headlights cutting through the dark as you follow a winding country road. The family sings along to a song, the wind carries the smell of hayfields, and the sense of freedom is almost overwhelming. For ordinary Americans, the car redefines possibility. Distances shrink, horizons expand, and the nation itself feels more connected. The automobile of the 1920s is not just a machine of steel and rubber. It is a symbol of transformation. It represents the leap from old ways into a modern, mobile America. It carries families to vacations, couples to romance, and workers to jobs. It reshapes cities, suburbs, and even identities. Without it, the decade would not roar. So when we think of the 1920s, we must not only picture jazz bands and flappers, but also the steady hum of engines on dusty roads, the laughter of families on Sunday drives, and the sight of a Model T rattling proudly toward the horizon. In that sound and movement lies the heartbeat of modern America. By the mid-1920s, America was no longer just moving faster on wheels. It was also becoming more connected through the invisible power of mass media. For the first time in history, millions of people across the country could listen to the same broadcast, watch the same film, or read the same magazine in the very same week. This was the birth of a national culture, and it transformed daily life as much as the automobile. Imagine gathering in your living room in 1924. The lamps glow softly, the family settles into chairs, and at the center of the room sits a polished wooden radio set. When your father adjusts the dial, static crackles, and then suddenly a voice emerges, clear and immediate. It might be a preacher from Chicago, a jazz band in New Orleans, or a baseball game broadcast live from New York. For a family in Kansas, this feels like magic. Radio spreads quickly. In 1922, fewer than 100,000 households owned sets. By 1930, more than 10 million do. Stations multiply rapidly, broadcasting music, news, comedy shows, and advertisements. For rural families, radio becomes a lifeline to the outside world, shrinking distances that once felt immense. For city dwellers, it is a new form of entertainment that brings friends and neighbors together. Children lean close to hear bedtime stories. Teenagers gather to dance when swing bands play live. Parents listen to weather reports, political speeches, or sermons. On election nights, families huddle in excitement, hearing results announced in real time instead of waiting for the morning paper. The radio collapses time and distance, creating a sense of unity that had never existed before. At the same time, the movie industry explodes. Silent films had already captivated audiences in the 1910s, but the 1920s make cinema the central entertainment of American life. Towns large and small build theaters, many designed as opulent movie palaces, with velvet seats, chandeliers, and painted ceilings. For a nickel, anyone, rich or poor, can step into a dream world for 2 hours. Every week, millions flock to theaters. Comedies with Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, and Buster Keaton bring laughter. Romantic dramas with Rudolph Valentino make audiences swoon. Swashbuckling adventures starring Douglas Fairbanks dazzle with stunts and sword fights. And in 1927, everything changes with a jazz singer. The first feature-length film with synchronized sound. Audiences gasp when Al Jolson speaks on screen, "You ain't heard nothing yet." Overnight, silent films begin to fade, and talkies usher in a new era. Movies do not just entertain, they influence fashion, speech, and even dreams. Women cut their hair into bobs to mimic Clara Bow, the it girl. Men slick back their hair like Valentino. Young couples copy the dances they see on screen. Hollywood becomes not just a place, but a symbol, the factory where modern myths are made. Print media expands too. Glossy magazines like Saturday Evening Post, Ladies, Home Journal, and Photoplay fill newsstands. They bring colorful illustrations, short stories by famous authors, advice columns, and celebrity gossip. For many Americans, magazines are a window into a world larger than their own, offering recipes, fashion tips, and national debates alongside local news. Advertising grows in power through these pages. Companies realize they can sell not just products but lifestyles. A soap ad promises beauty. A cigarette ad promises sophistication. A car ad promises freedom. These glossy images set new standards of desire and aspiration, influencing how Americans think about themselves and what they should own. What is remarkable about mass media in the 1920s is how it creates shared experiences. Before, a farmer in Iowa, a clerk in Boston, and a factory worker in Detroit might live in separate worlds. Now, they laugh at the same Chaplin gag, hum the same jazz tune from the radio, or wear a tie advertised in the same magazine. Radio, movies, and print weave Americans together into a single cultural fabric. Even language begins to shift, as slang spreads through radio shows and films. Phrases like the cat's pajamas or the bee's knees leap from screen to street. Children imitate their favorite characters. Adults debate the latest scandals. Culture becomes national, not just local. For young people, this new media world is electrifying. Teenagers form their own identities around what they hear and see. They dance to jazz records, practice movie star poses in mirrors, and cut out magazine clippings to paste in scrapbooks. Suddenly, youth culture is visible, vocal, and distinct from their parents' world. Parents worry, of course. They complain that movies are corrupting morals, that radio distracts from homework, that jazz is too wild. Ministers preach against Hollywood's excesses. Politicians debate censorship, yet the tide is unstoppable. The younger generation embraces mass media as their own language, a way to connect, to dream, and to rebel. Behind it all lies advertising, which expands dramatically during this decade. Companies sponsor radio programs, insert ads into movies, and film magazines with glossy promises. They sell toothpaste with the invented term halitosis to create fear of bad breath. They sell soap by linking cleanliness to romance. They sell cars as symbols of success, not just transportation. Advertising turns consumption into identity, a pattern that defines modern America. Of course, not everyone benefits equally. Radios cost money, and movie tickets, though cheap, still strain the poorest families. Illiteracy keeps magazines out of some hands. Rural areas sometimes struggle with weak radio signals. Still, the reach of mass media is unprecedented. Even those who do not own a radio might gather at a neighbor's house to listen, or hear news retold in barbershops and churches. And while mass media creates unity, it also spreads stereotypes. Films portray narrow visions of beauty and success. Radio programs often exclude minority voices. Magazines emphasize consumerism over community. The media of the 1920s is powerful, but it is also imperfect, shaping culture in ways both inspiring and limiting. By the end of the decade, it is hard to imagine life without these new connections. Radio is the heartbeat of the home. Movies are the nation's great escape. Magazines define trends and debates. Together, they transform America from a patchwork of local cultures into a nation with shared symbols, dreams, and stories. So as we picture the 1920s, we must see not only the cars on dusty roads or the jazz and speakeasies, but also the glowing radios in living rooms, the dazzling movie palaces on Main Street, and the magazines that spread new fashions across every corner of the country. In the hum of static, the flicker of film, and the glossy pages of print, America was learning to dream together. By the late 1920s, the hum of the radio, the glow of the movie screen, and the rhythm of jazz were not just reshaping American culture in general. They were shaping a brand new identity for young people. For the first time in history, teenagers and young adults began to see themselves as a distinct generation with their own fashions, music, and attitudes. This was the rise of youth culture, and it startled their parents as much as it thrilled themselves. For centuries, young people were expected to follow the steady path of their parents, work hard, marry early, and live within the boundaries of tradition. But the 1920s shook that pattern. A booming economy, new technologies, and changing social values gave young people more freedom. They no longer wanted to simply imitate their parents. They wanted to define themselves. In cities, this shift was obvious. Imagine a teenage girl in 1925 standing before her mirror. Instead of long Victorian dresses, she slips into a straight, knee-length frock, her hair cut into a sharp bob. She darkens her lips with rouge, fastens a string of beads around her neck, and admires her new look. This is the flapper, a symbol of youth rebellion. Flappers smoke cigarettes, dance the Charleston, and laugh loudly in public. All behaviors considered shocking by older generations. For young men, the changes are just as visible. They slick their hair with pomade, wear narrow suits, and copy the moves of movie stars. Instead of spending evenings under parental watch, they take their dates out in automobiles, escaping to soda fountains, dance halls, or even speakeasies. Independence is no longer a distant dream. It is a lived reality. The heartbeat of this youth culture is jazz. Born in African American communities in New Orleans, jazz spreads northward to Chicago, New York, and beyond, carried by musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. Its syncopated rhythms and improvisational style mirror the restless energy of young people. Picture a crowded dance hall in 1926. The floor vibrates with stomping feet as trumpets blare and clarinets wail. Young couples throw themselves into the Charleston, arms swinging and knees kicking in wild, joyful abandon. Sweat and laughter fill the air. Outside, ministers and moral reformers denounce jazz as sinful, but inside, the music is irresistible. Records and radio spread these sounds far beyond city clubs. Teenagers in small towns order phonograph records by mail, practicing the foxtrot in barns or attics. For them, jazz is not just music. It is identity, a soundtrack of rebellion against stillness, silence, and the heavy expectations of the past. Youth culture also takes shape in schools and colleges. More young people than ever attend high school during the 1920s, and universities expand as well. These campuses become laboratories of modernity, where students read new literature, debate social ideas, and join fraternities or sororities. Sports culture thrives too, with football games drawing crowds that roar almost as loudly as jazz halls. College life becomes another arena where young people separate themselves from parents, building rituals, slang, and friendships of their own. The automobile accelerates this independence. Cars become rolling symbols of youth freedom, offering private spaces away from home. Couples park by lakesides or country roads, away from parental eyes. Groups of friends pile into cars for weekend adventures, filling the roads with laughter and song. To older generations, this is unsettling. They see cars as machines of temptation, enabling unsupervised behavior. To youth, however, the car is liberation, the power to choose where to go, whom to meet, and how to spend their time. Magazines and movies amplify these trends. Photoplay celebrates the flapper look, while Hollywood films showcase daring romances and adventurous heroes. Teenagers copy hairstyles, clothes, and even slang from the screen. They plaster their walls with photos of movie stars, turning celebrity admiration into a ritual of adolescence. The culture of imitation and aspiration that dominates modern youth today first takes root in this decade. Parents and moral guardians, of course, push back. Preachers warn that flappers are ruining womanhood. Teachers scold boys for slick hair and slang. Politicians debate censorship of movies. Yet, the more adults protest, the more young people embrace their new identity. To them, rebellion is not just fun. It is a declaration of belonging to a generation that is different, modern, and alive. What makes this youth culture remarkable is its visibility. For the first time, adults recognize teenagers as a group with its own style, music, and priorities. The divide between generations is no longer hidden. It is played out on dance floors, in schoolyards, and even around dinner tables. When parents demand silence, the radio plays jazz. When parents urge modesty, flappers flaunt short skirts. When parents remind their children of tradition, the children reply with slang, laughter, and a swing of the hips. By the end of the decade, youth culture is not just a trend. It is a force. It challenges old definitions of respectability, pushes fashion and music into bold new directions, and makes independence an expectation rather than a privilege. These young people will soon face the Great Depression and later World War II. But in the 1920s, they carve out a cultural identity that announces, we are not our parents. We are something new. So when we think of the Roaring Twenties, we must remember not only the radios and speakeasies, but also the energy of young people who turned jazz into rebellion, cars into freedom, and fashion into statements of independence. Their spirit made the decade roar louder than any engine, and in their laughter and defiance, the future of modern youth culture was born. When we picture the 1920s, it is tempting to see only the glitter, chandeliers swinging above jazz-filled ballrooms, women in sequined dresses stepping out of gleaming automobiles, men in tuxedos raising glasses of champagne. Newspapers of the era printed endless photographs of high society weddings, yacht parties, and celebrity galas. For the wealthy elite, the Roaring Twenties were truly golden years. But for millions of other Americans, life looked nothing like this. The same decade that sparkled with wealth for some was shadowed by struggle for others. In places like New York's Fifth Avenue or Long Island's Gold Coast, the rich lived in homes that looked more like European palaces than American residences. Vast estates stretched for acres, with private gardens, marble staircases, and entire wings dedicated to entertaining guests. Servants managed every detail, from polishing silver to driving automobiles. For these families, life was a constant rhythm of leisure, golf tournaments, polo matches, weekends at seaside resorts, and glamorous costume balls. Their wardrobes alone could cost more than an entire working-class family earned in a year. Parisian gowns, diamond necklaces, and imported furs filled their closets. The arrival of the automobile only made this gap more visible. While working-class families pooled savings for years to buy a second-hand Ford, the wealthy ordered luxury vehicles from Cadillac or Packard without blinking. Some had entire garages with chauffeurs on staff. To them, the automobile was not just transportation, but a symbol of power, speed, and modernity. The irony was that the very factories producing these cars were staffed by men and women who could barely afford the products of their own labor. Meanwhile, inside urban tenements, families still crowded into small, dimly lit apartments where every penny went toward survival. Many workers stitched garments that sold for high prices in glamorous department stores, yet earned barely enough to cover rent. Their evenings were filled not with galas, but with endless mending of clothes, simple meals of bread and cabbage, and constant worry about the next week's wages. This contrast was not hidden, it was visible everywhere. On the same streets, one could see wealthy women in pearls stepping out of taxis, while barefoot children sold newspapers. Jazz clubs entertained high society in Manhattan, while in nearby neighborhoods, factory workers lined up at soup kitchens after layoffs. This duality defined the decade, dazzling luxury standing side by side with unrelenting hardship. One famous example of extravagance was the world of the socialites. Women like Gloria Vanderbilt or the fictional Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. They attended balls where orchestras played until dawn, where champagne flowed despite prohibition, and where entire gardens were lit with electric lights at a time when many rural homes had no electricity at all. The glitter of these parties made headlines, but they also highlighted how unevenly prosperity was distributed. At the same time, newspapers began covering the rise of millionaires made overnight through the stock market. Investing became a new obsession for the wealthy and middle class alike. For those at the top, speculation was a game with high stakes, but little risk losses could be absorbed by family fortunes. For working families who tried their luck in the market, a downturn could mean total ruin. This imbalance in risk mirrored the imbalance in lifestyle. Beyond the mansions and country clubs, Millions of Americans were trapped in cycles of long working hours, poor housing, and little hope of escape. In rural areas, farmers who did not own modern equipment struggled against falling crop prices. A single bad harvest could undo years of hard work. In cities, labor unions fought for shorter hours and better pay, but victories came slowly, and strikes were often met with violence. The press sometimes portrayed the wealthy as symbols of American success, but others criticized them as being out of touch. The phrase "the rich get richer" became common in political debates, even as average families worked 60 hours a week to put food on the table. The elite displayed wealth more openly than ever before. Charity balls raised money for hospitals or schools, but the expenses of the events themselves often exceeded the donations collected. This tension between appearance and reality created an undercurrent of unease beneath the surface glamour of the decade. Yet we should not view this divide only in numbers and images. Real stories make the contrast vivid. Imagine a factory worker in New York finishing a 12-hour shift, hands raw from sewing shirts, then walking past the glowing windows of Fifth Avenue shops where those shirts sold for more than his weekly pay. Or think of a farm family in Iowa, eating simple cornbread for supper, reading in a dim kitchen lit by kerosene, while newspapers featured photographs of glittering society dinners in Chicago and New York. These stories remind us that the 1920s were not just about flappers and jazz, but about inequality and resilience. At the same time, it is important to note that some of the wealthy did invest in progress. They funded libraries, universities, and museums. Philanthropy became a fashionable way to display moral responsibility. Still, the scale of inequality was vast. By the decade's end, the top 1% of Americans controlled nearly 40% of the nation's wealth. This imbalance created fragility in the economy when the crash came in 1929. Both rich and poor would feel the shock, but those already living on the edge had no cushion to soften the blow. Looking back, the Roaring Twenties teach us more than just the allure of jazz and fashion. They show us how quickly societies can become divided between those who live in comfort and those who fight daily for survival. They reveal the importance of balance between wealth and fairness, between freedom and responsibility. The glamorous stories of parties and penthouses are entertaining, but they must be understood alongside the stories of factory shifts, crowded apartments, and rural hardships. Only by seeing both sides can we understand what life truly looked like 100 years ago. In the end, the contrast between elite wealth and everyday struggle in the 1920s is not just history, it is a reminder. Prosperity without fairness creates cracks in the foundation of any society. The Roaring Twenties roared for some, but for many others they were years of endurance and survival. And when the music stopped at the decade's end, it was clear that inequality had not just shaped the 1920s, it had set the stage for the challenges of the Great Depression that followed. It is impossible to talk about life in the 1920s without mentioning the great transportation revolution that reshaped America from coast to coast. 100 years ago, the nation was suddenly on the move in ways never seen before, and that mobility did more than change how people traveled. It changed how they thought, worked, dreamed, and connected. Automobiles, trains, and even the first commercial airplanes rewired the very map of daily life. The story begins with Henry Ford's Model T, the car that put America on wheels. Before its arrival, horses and carriages dominated rural areas, while in cities people relied heavily on streetcars or simply walking. But the affordability of the Model T, thanks to Ford's assembly line production, turned ownership of a car from a luxury of the few into a possibility for millions of families. Farmers who once made only one trip a month into town suddenly found they could travel every week. Teenagers discovered new freedoms, driving out of parental sight for the first time. Families could visit relatives, attend dances, or even sell goods in distant markets. The car shrank distances and expanded opportunities at the same time. But cars did more than change personal lives. They transformed the landscape. Towns that had once revolved around railroad stations saw new businesses spring up along roadsides. Gas stations, auto repair shops, roadside diners, and eventually motels became part of a brand new commercial ecosystem. If you were a traveler on Route 66 in 1928, you might stop at a small filling station where the owner also sold sandwiches, repaired tires, and rented cabins. These humble beginnings grew into the roadside America that still defines long-distance travel today. Cars also changed the rhythm of farming communities. Instead of being isolated by miles of dirt roads, families could attend church or school events more regularly. A farmer could drive to town, buy parts for machinery, and be back by afternoon, something that once required losing an entire day. Yet the freedom of cars came with challenges. Early vehicles were fragile, prone to flat tires and mechanical failures. Rural roads were often muddy tracks that trapped wheels after storms. Families traveling across states had to carry extra tires, water cans, tools, and even ropes in case the car broke down. Long trips often turned into adventures filled with delays, breakdowns, and help from strangers along the road. Still, even with these obstacles, the sense of independence was intoxicating. Beyond cars, trains remained the backbone of long-distance travel. The 1920s were the golden age of luxury rail service, and none was more famous than the 20th Century Limited. Boarding this train in New York meant stepping into a rolling palace. Passengers walked a literal red carpet, the origin of the phrase red carpet treatment, and once aboard, they could visit dining cars with gourmet meals, lounge cars with writing desks and barbers, and sleeping compartments that folded cleverly from day to night. The punctuality of these trains was legendary. To ride the 20th Century Limited was not just about getting to Chicago quickly. It was about being seen as a person of status. For ordinary Americans, coach travel by train was less glamorous but still essential. It connected small towns to big cities, moved farm produce to markets, and carried workers to opportunities far from home. The train tracks acted like veins and arteries in the national body, carrying not just people but also information, goods, and culture. A family in Iowa could board a train and in a day be in Chicago, where they might see skyscrapers, listen to jazz, or attend a baseball game. These journeys shaped how Americans imagined themselves, not just as members of a small town or a farm community, but as part of a vast and interconnected nation. Yet even as trains carried millions, a new contender was rising in the skies: aviation. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic captured the world's imagination and transformed airplanes from experimental machines into symbols of the future. By the late 1920s, small commercial airlines began offering passenger service, often in Ford tri-motor planes nicknamed Tin Geese. Flying was not comfortable, deafening engine noise, wicker seats, no bathrooms, no meals, but it was fast. A trip that took a full day by train might take only a few hours by plane. Businessmen with urgent meetings and families facing emergencies were the first to embrace this risky but exciting new form of travel. Airports at the time were little more than grass fields with a bench and a telephone, but the idea of crossing states by air thrilled the imagination. For a nervous passenger clutching a handbag on her first flight, every bump of turbulence felt terrifying. but the payoff was arriving home in hours instead of days. These early flights laid the groundwork for the global aviation industry that we now take for granted. Mobility reshaped not only distances but also psychology. When travel by horse was the norm, distances felt enormous. To go 50 miles might require planning, overnight stops, and days of time. By car, that same distance became a morning errand. By train, hundreds of miles could be crossed in a day. By plane, entire states disappeared beneath your feet in hours. This compression of time and space changed how Americans thought about opportunity. College students could study farther from home. Families could relocate across the country. Salesmen could cover entire regions in weeks instead of months. Tourism became more democratic. Middle-class families began taking vacations to national parks or coastal resorts that were once reachable only by the wealthy. Guidebooks, road maps, and travel advertisements encouraged people to see America through their windshields. The very idea of leisure travel was reshaped in the 1920s, no longer reserved for elites, but increasingly accessible to ordinary people. Of course, not everyone benefited equally. Many rural families still lacked the money to buy cars. Segregation meant that African American travelers faced discrimination and danger, with hotels and restaurants refusing service. Pullman porters on trains, while respected for their professionalism, often endured long hours and low wages, serving wealthier passengers who barely noticed them. And flying, for most Americans, remained far out of reach, reserved for those with money or urgent necessity. Still, the revolution in transportation was undeniable. By the end of the decade, there were more than 23 million registered automobiles in the United States, roughly 1 for every 5 Americans. Highways were being paved, gas stations dotted the landscape, and commercial aviation was slowly spreading its wings. Trains continued to roar across the country, binding the coasts together. America was literally and figuratively in motion, and this movement was not just about distance, it was about identity. To be American in the 1920s meant embracing speed, mobility, and the promise of progress. Looking back, the transportation revolution of the 1920s feels like the beginning of the modern world we know today. It gave people a new sense of freedom, transformed businesses, expanded tourism, and reshaped communities. It connected the lives of tenement workers, farmers, small-town shopkeepers, and wealthy elites in ways that no previous generation had experienced. Yet it also revealed inequalities, vulnerabilities, and the need for new systems to manage mobility safely and fairly. In the end, the 1920s were not just roaring with jazz and bright with neon. They were moving at unprecedented speed, with every engine, wheel, and wing pushing the nation into the modern age. As the 1920s marched toward their close, the United States seemed unstoppable. Radios buzzed in millions of homes, automobiles crowded city streets, jazz spilled from dance halls, and skyscrapers climbed higher into the sky. Newspapers proclaimed prosperity. Politicians boasted of endless growth, and ordinary people began to believe that the good times would never end. Yet beneath the glitter of the Roaring Twenties, cracks were widening. The very forces that fueled excitement, mass production, easy credit, stock speculation, and inequality were also laying the foundation for one of the darkest economic chapters in American history, the Great Depression. By 1928, optimism felt almost like a national religion. Factories were producing at record speeds, car ownership soared, cities electrified, and advertising promised that consumer goods were the gateway to happiness. Department stores offered installment plans, allowing families to buy now, pay later. Radios, refrigerators, and even cars could be purchased on credit. For the first time, consumer debt became a normal part of life. To many, this felt like progress. To economists, it looked like a house of cards. Nothing symbolized the era's optimism more than the stock market. Once the domain of wealthy investors, stocks became a national obsession. Taxi drivers, housewives, and factory workers poured savings into the market, convinced that prices could only rise. Newspapers printed stories of clerks who became millionaires overnight. Brokers encouraged buying on margin, where investors could borrow money to purchase stocks. This practice allowed people to control large amounts of stock with only a small down payment, but it also meant that if prices dropped, debts would swallow them whole. On Wall Street, the frenzy was palpable. Brokers' offices overflowed with crowds, watching ticker tape machines spit out endless strings of rising numbers. Conversations in cafes, barbershops, and churches drifted towards stock tips. It seemed that everyone wanted a piece of the action. Yet behind the rising numbers, speculation, not stability, was driving much of the growth. While cities buzzed with wealth, large parts of America were struggling in silence. Farmers who had expanded production during World War I to feed Europe now faced collapsing crop prices in the 1920s. Tractors and machines increased output, but overproduction drove prices so low that many farmers could not cover debts. Foreclosure spread across the Midwest and South, and families abandoned farms that had been in their names for generations. Industrial workers, too, lived precariously. Though wages rose slightly, they did not keep pace with profits. Factory jobs remained grueling and unstable, and a layoff could plunge a family into poverty overnight. In tenement neighborhoods, children still worked to help support households, even as magazines celebrated the luxury of the elite. The gap between rich and poor widened to historic levels. By the decade's end, the wealthiest 1% of Americans controlled nearly 2/5 of the nation's assets. There were whispers of danger, even amid the excitement. Economists warned that stock prices were inflated far beyond real company earnings. Banks grew nervous about the volume of loans tied up in speculation. Journalists pointed to growing unemployment in rural areas, yet such voices were drowned out by the roar of optimism. To question prosperity was to sound unpatriotic, even foolish. Most Americans kept dancing to the music, convinced the party would last forever. Then, in October 1929, the illusion shattered. On October 24th, known as Black Thursday, stock prices tumbled. Panic spread as margin calls forced investors to sell. Crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange, their faces pale with fear. Banks tried to reassure the public, but by October 29th, Black Tuesday, the market collapsed completely. Billions of dollars in paper wealth vanished within hours. Families who had staked life savings on stocks saw them reduced to nothing. The same newspapers that once celebrated easy fortunes now carried headlines of ruin. At first, many believed the downturn would be temporary, just another correction in an otherwise booming economy. But as months passed, the consequences deepened. Banks that had overextended themselves failed. Factories cut production. Farmers, already desperate, watched prices fall even further. Unemployment soared. Lines formed outside soup kitchens. Men who once wore suits to office jobs now sold apples on street corners. Families lost homes, packed belongings into cars, and drifted in search of work. The contrast with the glitter of just a few years earlier was staggering. The story of the Roaring Twenties is not just one of glamour, jazz, and modernity. It is also a story of imbalance between wealth and poverty, production and consumption, speculation and stability. The decade dazzled, but it dazzled like fireworks, brilliant, short-lived, and followed by darkness. The lessons remain vital, even today. Prosperity built on unchecked speculation and rising inequality is fragile. When only a portion of society thrives, the entire system is at risk. By 1930, the music had faded. The dance halls were quieter. The radios carried news of layoffs instead of laughter, and the glittering mansions seemed like fortresses in a sea of despair. The decade that had once promised endless growth now served as a reminder that unchecked optimism can blind a nation to looming dangers. And yet, even in the hardship of the Great Depression, the energy of the 1920s did not vanish entirely. The spirit of innovation, the dream of mobility, and the taste for culture would endure, reshaping themselves in different ways during the hard years ahead. But the roaring had ended. The echoes, though, still shape how we remember that remarkable decade. And so, as we look back on the 1920s, we see a decade of contradictions. It was a time of progress and glamour, but also of hardship and inequality. It gave us radios, automobiles, jazz, flappers, Hollywood dreams, and the very first signs of modern youth culture. Yet behind the shine were cracks that would break open with the Great Depression. The story of the Roaring Twenties reminds us that history is never one-sided. It is joy and struggle, light and shadow, all unfolding together. Thank you for staying with me on this journey through one of the most fascinating chapters of American history. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment about what part of the 1920s surprised you the most. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and I will see you in the next story.